Hello everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. And our topic of the day is going to be quite a familiar one. And I'd I would dare to say it's maybe one of the most interesting one that I've had to make a life on so far. So today I would like to talk to you guys about apocalypse and manga and how these themes actually relates to each other. Well, first things first, I would like to remind you guys that during the start of the COVID pandemic, around February last year until September, I was actually in Japan, so I could actually witness the COVID outbreak by myself and also the measures, the lockdowns that the government actually did. And to begin this today's life, I would just like to show you guys this image. This is a picture of Akihabara. Akihabara is basically the capital of our otaku culture. It's like the most crowded place in all of Tokyo ever. Well, except maybe for Shibuya, but that's debatable. I would say that Akihabara is always busy, and this is a picture I actually took when when I was there last year, around around March actually. It looked like this because of the COVID fear. Well, some of you might not realize how important this is, but if you go in the streets in Japan, there's always people. Like no matter how small the town, there's always people outside in the street. So right now you still see some people because some of the shops were still open, but overall it's a huge change. Usually, especially around this crossroad, there's always like so many people that it's hard to walk to it. Mm. And this is a picture that I took in another area of Tokyo. As you can see, it's not actually very much different. Um, in fact, it's just as empty. People just go outside um, for some fresh air, and that's about it. When you think about how the COVID affects the Japanese, well, you can see it here. Like people just stays at home as much as possible, and they were so scared and worried about even going out. To give to start off with maybe lighter tone, like I've had I've got an anecdote to share with you guys. So basically, it was at the beginning of the pandemic, and I basically went outside to because I wanted to go to Akihabara when I took this picture. Um, but my goal that day was just to chill and to visit Akihabara because I wanted to go outside because it's fun when you're in Japan to actually visit the country, and that's what I did. At that time, there were no government instructions about the COVID. There were no government measures. The outbreak just barely began at that time. It was just a general public concern more than actually anything from the government. And as soon as I got near the train station, I noticed something. I did not have a mask because actually nobody like there were no like bills or anything, like no instruction telling you to wear a mask. You did not need to wear masks to enter shops at that time. It was still early, but I didn't have a mask. But in the street, everyone had one. Like everyone absolutely wore a mask, and that just put me like in such a state of awareness of how important it is. And then I just went to buy a mask and wear it for the rest of the day. But that just shows you how how good the Japanese people are for taking measures against those things. They are so well organized when it comes to facing the pandemic. And you know, maybe you can say that it's because of the more strict ways of Japanese life, or maybe it's because of the education. But there's actually some good reasons that I'd like to share with you guys about essentially why the Japanese react this way to those kind of emergency situations. So let's take a small travel back in time, because today we're going to talk about apocalypse. So I had to make this conversion because actually, when I first arrived in Japan around 2019, uh, everywhere was crowded. Like there were crowds, like absolutely everywhere, and it was just insane. And during the pandemic, it was those type of times where there were not that many people in the streets, and it was just impressive, I would say. So it really did feel like a bit of an apocalypse in a sense, as if everyone disappeared or something. And you know, the apocalypse, what does it makes us feel? It makes us feel like we're lost, terrified at the idea that the world of comfort in which we lived in is no more. It it basically makes us feel powerless, and the idea that we as human beings are powerless in front of apocalyptic situations and we can only do our best to survive does trigger this, you know, survival instinct in us and creates ultimately a lot of interaction with other human beings. And that is basically the core of apocalyptic manga. But I'd like to go back to why the Japanese people are so sensitive to the idea of an apocalypse. So this image here represents a Yayoi period village. So you see, Japanese people were, the population in Japan was at first a nomadic population, and then agriculture came, which then allowed the local population to create villages. And because Japan is such a disaster potent place to live in, I mean, earthquakes, like when I was in Japan, there were earthquakes that I could feel almost like weekly, you know. So earthquakes, strong storms, tropical storms, and also a lot of weather changes, especially around Kyushu, where the Japanese population began to develop first. Sometimes there are like thunderstorms coming in, and 1 hour later it's gone. That's just how the big changes can happen. And around that time, there's a concept that was built when the first Japanese people settled inside villages. And that concept is the concept of inside and outside. What I mean by that is that when you're inside the village and inside your house, you can be true to yourself, you can be in your comfort zone. And so the village is a kind of designed comfort zone for essentially anyone who sort of comfort zone for all the Japanese people living in that village. And as such, this comfort zone provides this idea of protection, that you are safe and you can continue living your normal life in that kind of place. While on the outside, there are beasts, there are dangers, there are, a lack of resource or a lack of comfort, essentially. So this duality between your comfort zone inside the villages and the outside, which is dangerous and hostile, was the first step into the creation of the Japanese mentality around the comfort zone. This idea that when you're outside, you have to be polite, you have to adapt, you have to do your best and face the pressure. And when you are inside, you can be comfortable and you can basically enjoy your comfort. You can be more like yourself. This duality actually started at that moment. And this duality basically creates something inside the Japanese societies, something that we can call another form of duality of behavior. When you are outside, you have another type of behavior and look at the world compared to when you are inside, where you can be more true to yourself. And especially around the Tokyo area, you're going to see that people who are outside really behaves differently than when they are in private with their friends because of this kind of natural instinct that came over thousands of years. And as such, for the people of that era, um, well, the apocalypse is essentially, you know, it could be a hurricane, it could be anything that just destroys their village and force them to actually start building everything again. Um, if I had to mention a movie where you can see it, well, it would be Princess Mononoke, because in Princess Mononoke you see some of the very earliest villages, and in the human village you can see this sort of settlement. And this is really interesting because you can see all those solid wood and those spikes here. That was how the villages at that time were built. They were built to create a sense of comfort and protection for the people living inside, because the outside was such a hostile place, and the awareness of the hostile nature of the outside also eventually made the Japanese become more aware of the ephemeral nature of life, that anyone can die at any moment, and that we have to be always prepared for that big emergency moment when everything can go down. And because of this, you see, the fear of losing your comfort zone increased. Actually, um, to illustrate to you guys better how this concept of comfort zone works, imagine it like this, okay? At the same time, around the same time, Europeans and basically, you know, in maybe even Africans, in comparison, they lived in places with much less natural disaster happening. That's for one. And the second one is that they actually lived in a situation where, you know, they were, even in their own house, they were not entirely in a kind of comfort zone. There was not as big of a duality between the inside and the outside. You know, this one of the cultural heritage that you can see from this, not from actually the Yayoi period, but from actually much later. But one of the heritage of this kind of difference is that you can see that in Japan, people takes off their shoes inside much more often. Like it's kind of a thing that everyone does because they're in their comfort zone. They're in this clean area that is their house. While in the West, you can see that a lot of people actually wears socks and shoes even inside their own house, because and sometimes when they sleep, you know, they wear their basic clothes for sleeping, unlike Japanese who very often are going to wear like pajamas and this kind of thing. You can see that there is this consciousness of the outside, of the uncomfortable nature of being outside of your comfort zone. And from there on, history just kept evolving, and the nature of life being actually fragile also came from the fact that to face against nature's dangers, people naturally gathered around leaders, around villages. And at some point, because of this feeling of being powerless constantly and in front of nature, people are, of course, worship gods because they thought that gods are responsible for those things. That, by the way, the religious beliefs in God, in deities, is not a belief that most Japanese people learn. They just have it inside of them. It's kind of a natural thing to believe in some ways into the supernatural, which in return kind of feeds the collective imagination of the Japanese society, which is actually one of the reasons why there's so much creativity um, among the society, because people just likes to imagine this kind of that something supernatural is out there, something not entirely scientific is out there. And you can also see that there's a lot of religious cult in Japan really in relation to uh, that kind um, of thing, because people are more easily drawn toward believing in the supernatural aspect. Um, yeah, and so at the end of all of this, here comes the modern times. And by the way, this is what it looks like in Japan when it's a normal day. It's so crowded. But yeah, in the modern times, on top of this duality between the comfort zone and the the outside, came the prospect of emptiness and void. What I mean by that is that in the 80s, essentially the Japanese society began to evolve around big metropolitan areas. Sense of individual existence began to slowly fade further and further, at the point where people essentially exist as a society collectively more than as individuals with different mentalities. This is also going to be further emphasized by the companies, who are going to require everyone to stand in line and think the same way, like the same stuff, which is actually a cultural thing, which led to animation in the 80s and also manga in the 80s to become overhaul darker in tone. And this reflection about what is our true place in society, what is our true nature, who are we in the end, and does our existence even matter? Those kind of questions made it seem like in all those stories, for example, Akira or Ghost in the Shell, those stories made humans look so insignificant. And it basically began to create a kind of passion, or should I say obsession, from some authors to explore those themes. This theme of apocalypse will be born from this trend. Because what is the apocalypse in the end? First, you can qualify that apocalypse is losing your comfort zone, is losing what you know, is losing the world as you know it. Why? Why does apocalypse revolve so much around losing your comfort zone? It's simply because when Japan industrialized and entered into the modern era after the Second World War, most people began to live into the bigger cities, and those bigger cities will eventually become the only reality that people knows. They live, and instead of going outside of the village and face like their discomfort, um, basically the entire city outside of their own house has become their discomfort zone. And making such a transition means that, you know, the discomfort is going to be much more often felt. And even if you're not anymore in your comfort zone in the city, there is no real danger. There's just this sense of emptiness. And emptiness is going to be something very important to Apocalypse as a team, because what Apocalypse tends to try to achieve is this loneliness feeling. And in the end, if nobody in the society cares about you, if nobody in the society is part of your friend group or comfort zone, well, even if you're surrounded by a crowd, you're going to feel extremely lonely. And this is what I wanted to talk about when it comes to comfort zone, is that even around so many people, you feel like you don't matter. You feel like in this modern Japanese society, you as an individual don't matter really much, and your existence then becomes harder to confirm, harder to really, this sense of identity is really important for every single human being. And losing this sense that everyone is unique, everyone is a different person, is going to create this illusion to everyone that, you know, if one person doesn't care about me, maybe everyone else doesn't care neither. And at the end of the day, it's almost as if just by living in the city and by being lonely, what difference does it make with not living in the city and not being surrounded by people? The same emptiness is present, and this emptiness combined with the vivid imagination surrounding the supernatural that I've talked about before are going to merge in some authors' heads, which is going to give birth to a ton of great manga that we're going to talk about right now. So, well, first manga I thought it would be interesting to tell to you guys about is Girls Last Tour. This is maybe the cutest one in the entire collection of the apocalyptic manga that I'm going to talk about today. So, what is Girls Last Tour? Okay, so basically, the Girls Last Tour is essentially a manga where you have those two girls here, um, whose name I don't actually remember. I'm really sorry for it. And basically, those are the two only characters that we see in the entire story. We do see some other humans, but they come and they leave really fast. They don't last more than like a few chapters most of the time. And so you're by yourself with those two girls, and they're in a world that has been ravaged by war, and they have like this kind of weapon, like a military type of vehicle to travel around. And also, most of the time, you can see one big problem with their world that is purely post-apocalyptic, by the way. The problem is that they have a lot of weapons. There's weapon everywhere, there's military facilities everywhere, but there's no food, there's no nature, there's no life-friendly thing. There's only war-friendly establishments everywhere. And actually, when you think about this sense of emptiness, well, it is most well represented by those two girls traveling around in a huge world and trying to actually find a way out. Essentially, what they want to do is, find a way, a place to live their normal life. And as they travel around, they kind of discover the past history of their country. They don't understand really politics, and they don't understand history. They don't know what's going on in the outside world. They are just two young girls who are trying to survive. And basically, that's it. They kind of discover through the vestiges of their world how their world is and try to find more food to just survive. There's like almost nobody else than them. They are usually only by themselves, and they have to just find their way out through this immense world that is. I think it's a city, but like everything is kind of asphalt on the ground everywhere. There's no nature anymore. It feels like the entire world has transformed into a big city, and their story is actually quite sad because when you think about it, a world that has more food, more weapons than food is absolutely sad. It's and as such, it's kind of a criticism I would like to say about our current society's big budget into military, but it's also extremely cute. I think the art style is really stunning. I think they do a really great job at entertaining you with interesting stories. So you're not going to get bored at least. And here comes my number two, Doctor Stone. So Doctor Stone, for those who don't know it, the manga is absolutely wonderful. The anime is pretty cool too, and I'm going to talk mostly about the manga because I think the manga has more scenes than the actual anime. And so here goes the story. Okay, Doctor Stone is purely post-apocalyptic. What I mean by that is that basically one day Senku, the main character, who is a genius of science and who has learned everything science knows, witnessed something strange happening. A green light that turns every single human being on Earth into stone. And then, 3,000 years later, Senku wakes up and is kind of out of his petrification into stone state, and he's back alive again. And then he's going to find a way to chemically turn back everyone from stone to human state. But the problem right now is that 3,000 years has passed. Every single human establishment was destroyed or not in the right shape to function anymore. So they're basically back to the Stone Age, which is a very interesting um, wording of things because the title is Doctor Stone, and I guess Senku is kind of smart with scientific knowledge, so he's a doctor, and stone, people turns into stone, and then there's they are back to the Stone Age. There's a lot of concept about this stone world that I think is really fantastic. And the quest of Senku is basically to rebuild from scratch human civilization by the knowledge of science. And as such, during his journey, you see him introduced to other humans, like every single important invention of science, be it like antibiotics, be it like light, be it like uh, vapor machines and all those stuff. And at some point, you see that how important it is that science during an age, a stone age basically, how science can be considered almost magical, how the knowledge of science basically feels like, you know, like magic, like a miracle. And it is post-apocalyptic, but it's in no way like super dark. It's just very intriguing because so far we still don't know what petrified every human. That's still the big end game mystery of this series. And I think it's really great because it makes science seems super fun because Senku doesn't explain like every single calculations or like complicated formula. Okay, he just shows you that it actually works, and as such, the subject of science is treated in a very light mood, which makes it so that even if you're not into science, you're not like super good with science, or you don't want complicated stuff, you don't need to understand science to actually enjoy the show. That is super cool. And you know, as some of the first myths in human history is that some of the first human myths revolves around how God gives fire to humans. You see, well, this can be also seen as a story that is almost mythical in itself, because Senku is a kind of human, yes, but also a deity of science who gives scientific knowledge to humans for their development. And you basically see that kind of story. It's really fun. Um, let's see what's coming up next. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. Uh, I guess most of the people are familiar with Akira, but Akira is both a movie and also a manga. It was a manga before becoming a movie, essentially. Um, I think the movie is really stunning in the graphics, in the imagery, but the manga is more complete if you want to actually understand the world of Akira. So, for those who actually don't know, I'm going to briefly talk about Akira's story. So, Akira is it's a name that is a mystery itself. So, one thing you have to understand here is that Akira, as a name, is one of the only names in Japanese first name that can be used both as a woman's name and a male's name. It's very rare in Japan that you're going to find a name that can work for both. And why I want to emphasize on this aspect is because Akira itself, as a title, is a mystery. Because from hearing this, you can know that it's a name, but you don't know what the name implies. You don't even know if it's a name of a guy or of a girl, basically, because of this sense of mystery around the name. And actually, they don't really explain until very late what is Akira, but the story revolves around a futuristic Tokyo that has been through a nuclear world war, I believe, and has been rebuilt. So the society is very satirical. It's really a dystopian type of society where you follow basically some motor gang uh, kind kind of teenagers who are kind of delinquents. You can call them Yankees in Japan, or even there's a word in Japanese that's called bosozoku, and that's basically who they are. Like go look at this term bosozoku, you're going to understand. They're basically bike gangs with their own code of honor and their own code of conduct. Well, not really honor, because they often tend to fight really dirty in the in the streets. They like to compete with their motorbike, and they just basically act really like rebellious people. Like they're not really friendly with the police. They really cause trouble for most people, and that's some of the major threats of Bosuzoku gangs. And this Akira features the friendship story between the two main characters, Tetsuo and Kaneda. And of course, Kaneda is the main character, but Tetsuo is going to be extremely important because he's the one who's going to be a key key character in the story to introduce to the further concepts. Akira offers actually a world of post-nuclear warfare situation. I strongly believe that it implies a lot to the Hiroshima Nagasaki bombings, which left the world in such a sad state. The subject of atomic of nuclear apocalypse actually is just something that is like absolutely omnipresent. When you look at this, for example, is one of the explosions that you can see. You can see is just it. The designs of the art style is just made to make you feel lost, hopeless, and also empty. You can see that here, by the way, is like a massive city. It's not actually like just a field with rocks. Is there are actually skyscrapers and the city of Tokyo area, and as such, it offers this reference to the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, which are, you know, disasters. One of the last disasters which traumatized the Japanese society, and it does it does imply. Yeah, no, excuse me. I'm gonna restart what I'm going to say. So after those events, ever since the 50s, actually, there were a development of kaiju movies. For example, kaiju like Godzilla and other monsters, who are also a kind of image to image reference to the nuclear bombings. I think kaiju stuff are really similar to apocalypse manga because they basically feature a form of destruction that you cannot really face or fight or protect yourself against. You just have to accept it and live through it and try to survive it. And Godzilla itself, he is kind of a reference to nuclear destructive power because it's something that you cannot do anything about. If it actually happens, you can only hope for the best. And that's why I think Akira treats the subject of apocalypse so well, because this is one of the first form of apocalypse when you think about apocalyptic manga, nuclear apocalypse world. Um, of this motorbike gang is basically that one day they're going to find a small child and on the road that they almost crushed, and then as they approach, they notice something really strange about that child, and eventually they learn that this child is basically part of a lot of government scientific experiment, and they get contacted by the government, and one of their friends kind of gets kidnapped or by the government for extra tests, um, and then this small motor gang becomes involved in the greater government secrets and conspiracies and basically the secret military projects of the government, the superpower of human, and all that kind of extremely mysterious stuff, and that feels really a lot like 20th Century Boys. Mm, and hello Adi, hello Pascal, by the way, welcome to the live. I'm sorry, since I began to make those PowerPoint kind of live, I cannot actually see who is like joining the live and who's not. So I'm sorry if I cannot say hi to everyone here. So, but if you comment, of course, I'm going to see it. So yeah, that's about Akira. And Akira is one of those legendary manga that I believe are just uh, made with such historical antecedent, such historical impact, such historical inspiration that they're going to be timeless. They're going, it's Akira is going to be always interesting, always understandable for every era. I don't think it's something that is only understandable if you live in let's say 2021. Um, oh, Frank Doe, welcome, Frank, by the way. And yes, in fact, Fist of the North Star is a post-apocalyptic manga because the world is just so crazy in Fist of the North Star, or should I say, Okuto no Ken. But yeah, back to Akira. Well, at at O-Taku Manga Launch, we have actually received recently this 35th anniversary box. Um, wait. that you can see here. Inside there are like 6 volumes of Akira that are basically extremely big. Those are big, big books. Because when a manga can draw their manga, they do it like in this kind of big pages, so they can really do the details. And then when it's printed first as a manga, they are going to reduce the size so that the manga takes less space. But this big collector box actually offers you the original experience and every single details of the mangaka Kazuhiro Otomo's art style. So it's absolutely crazy. I think this box is just so great for anyone who wants to, you know, make a gift or something, or just have it for yourself. It's just insane. I think also the paper quality is really, really great. Um, Next up, yeah, okay. I wanted to talk about one of the most recent manga. Actually, Attack on Titan is definitely a post-apocalyptic manga. Okay, it's not set in the modern world, but you have to understand something here, that apocalypse does not have to be always related to modern or futuristic world or dystopian world. It can be anywhere as long as there's an establishment of a city or a lifestyle that can be threatened by a superior form of destruction against which you cannot do anything. And that's basically, Attack on Titan is simply about a story where humans live inside walls that protects them from titans, and they have basically lost their world to titans who roams the outside world, gigantic titans that they cannot really fight. And unlike most manga of the genre, there's a really high death rate. Like there's so many main characters dying. It's just crazy. It's because there's so many people dying in the manga. Uh, Fighting Titan never feels easy. There's always this tension built up, and that's maybe the my favorite thing about Attack on Titan. Uh, the, the illustration, the art style is also very unique to its author. Um, Also remember that the author of Attack on Titan lives in Kyushu, which is the one of the region touched by the atomic bombings, and also one of the region where military debates are the most active in. So he actually very well understands those topics. And in Attack on Titan, you're going to see a lot of military type of aesthetics. And then our last stop is going to be Berserk, my favorite manga out of all of those. Actually, well, actually, it's kind of equal with Doctor Stone, but if you guys want something really dark, Berserk is the one to go with. It's set in medieval ages, and you know, Berserk is basically so dark, so bloody. Like, you know, the illustration of the author always gives you more disgusting, more scary monsters. And by the way, look at this color effect. Those shadow effect that he makes are all made with ink, with his own pen, that he basically draws pitch black content. It's pitch black here. It's it's just something that not even anime can adapt properly. When it comes to visual quality. Um, and yes, and one of the things that Berserk actually does really well is to give you the sense of hopelessness, and also emptiness, because there's so many big images where the protagonist, Guts, is kind of alone against an army of monsters, or he's just alone in a deserted place. Those aesthetics are really part of the apocalyptic genre. And welcome, Lou, by the way. Did not see you coming in. But yeah, um, I wanted to talk about apocalypse in different era, because I think from the introduction of what I was talking about in the beginning about the villages in the ancient Japanese time, I think apocalypse is not a theme that came with modern times only. It's a team that was strengthened by modern times. Basically, the imagination about apocalypse has been, you know, to a much higher level than ever before in history. Um, and manga was simply the one of the mediums on which those authors could express their love and their imagination for this genre. At the end of the day, um, I mean, at the end of the day, you see, apocalypse is something that really fascinates everyone, and I wanted today to give to you guys some historical origins about this, how Japanese people perceive the apocalypse, and why. Because you know, uh, apocalypse, unlike slashers, unlike other horror themes, does not revolve really around the death of the nature of death and life all the time. Like apocalypse can be essentially better explained when you look at actually the destruction of the world, and the world as you know it is the world of comfort you're used to live in. And this is how I will qualify the apocalyptic genre. Is basically a genre where you explore the how you survive in case your world was suddenly destroyed by something you can do nothing about. And yeah, so that's going to be it for today's live. I hope everyone enjoyed it. And in the future lives, I'm going to be talking about a lot of different content. Maybe talk about the the rebuild of Evangelion movies. Also talk about the origin of fantasy. I believe next week is I'm going to be talking about fantasy in manga, and that is really important if you want to actually understand like why does Japanese people love European style fantasy so much. Where does it comes from? This kind of you know obsession for the isekai genre basically comes from this obsession for European medieval aesthetics. So where does that come from? And if you think you have like a theory, I invite you to give it to me next time during the live. And for now, well, it's time to say goodbye and thank you so much for coming today. And then, well, from now on is see you next time.